Welcome to the debate. So, if I asked you to learn the piano, you'd probably, immediately put your hands on the keys. We just assume that doing is learning.
Right, yeah, because if you aren't making noise, you aren't making music.
Exactly. But when it comes to the architecture of the human brain, and specifically language acquisition, what if touching the keys right away is actually holding you back?
Okay, that is an interesting premise.
Right? So today, we're looking at the silent foundation, mastering English through listening. The text basically argues that listening shouldn't just be this passive background activity, but rather it is the primary foundational mechanism that actually builds language. I'll be arguing that prioritizing an immersive, listening-first approach fundamentally rewires the brain for direct comprehension, which, makes grammar-heavy translation obsolete.
And I'll be arguing the other side. Downgrading explicit speaking in grammar practice leaves learners with, frankly, massive structural gaps. The text relies really heavily on emulating children absorbing language naturally before ever even speaking.
Which makes sense, right?
Sure, but that works beautifully if you're 3 years old and someone is, feeding you. Adults simply do not have a 2-year silent period. We have to navigate complex social structures immediately.
I hear that, but that urgency is exactly why adults fail using traditional methods.
How do you mean?
Well, when you immediately force output, your brain relies on translating from your native language. It creates a massive cognitive bottleneck. The text actually points to the silent period not as some luxury, but as a biological necessity for something called phonemic mapping.
Okay, wait, explain what you mean by that in this context.
Sure. Basically, an adult brain literally filters out foreign sounds as background noise. If you try to broadcast, like to speak, before you've dialed into the exact auditory frequency of the language, everything comes out as static. Listening is the act of dialing in. You have to neurologically hear the language before your brain can categorize the sounds accurately enough to reproduce them.
Right. Tuning the radio makes sense for sound recognition, I'll give you that. But the text pushes this a lot further, claiming the goal is not perfection, the goal is progress. It tells learners they don't need to understand every word.
Which takes the pressure off.
But that is incredibly dangerous for an adult learner. If you are constantly listening and just guessing the context, but never explicitly correcting your own output, you risk fossilizing errors.
Wait, how so? If the continuous input you're hearing is correct, wouldn't your output eventually align to match it?
Not necessarily, no. Fossilization happens because the brain paves a neural shortcut for a wrong grammar rule just to, survive a conversation.
Oh, like a quick fix.
Exactly. Let's say you use the wrong verb tense, but the person understands you anyway. Your brain thinks, great, that worked, and paves that incorrect shortcut right in concrete. And once paved, it's incredibly hard to dig up. Because without explicit grammar practice, nobody is forcing you to accurately reproduce the structural mechanics.
Okay, I see the risk there, but the silent foundation argues that context provides a much stronger structural anchor than mechanical rule memorization ever could.
I'm skeptical.
Well, let's look at the text example of the word confident. Hearing someone say, she felt confident before her job interview, complete with the emotional resonance and the natural stress of the speaker's voice, it does something profound.
It gives you the vibe, sure.
More than a vibe, it completely bypasses the need for structural translation and maps the word directly to a situational feeling.
Context is fantastic for comprehension, but comprehension and production use overlapping but entirely distinct neural pathways.
Wait, break that down.
Think of it neurobiologically. Your brain has specific areas for understanding language, right? But entirely different motor pathways for speech production.
Okay.
You can map all the emotional resonance you want for the word confident, but if you don't actively practice speaking, you haven't physically trained the motor pathways connecting your brain to your jaw, your tongue, your vocal cords to produce an entirely new phonetic sound. You end up with a learner who understands everything and can articulate almost nothing.
That is a fair point on the motor pathways, but can you really train your jaw if you haven't fully mapped the sound accurately in your brain first?
Well, that is exactly why the text champions consistent daily exposure over forced speaking drills. It asks for just 10 to 15 minutes a day of listening, even while you're walking, cooking, or commuting.
Which brings up a massive contradiction in the methodology for me.
How is that a contradiction? Because how can an activity performed while multitasking truly function as this rigorous active training process for your brain that the text claims it is.
Because you're still engaged with the sound.
Barely. If I'm chopping vegetables and just trying to catch the main idea of a podcast, I am highly likely to miss the critical linguistic details, the prepositions, the subtle verb tense shifts. It completely shifts from active cognitive training to just passive background noise.
But it isn't passive background noise if there's repetition. The text specifically advises listening to the exact same content multiple times.
Even while multitasking?
Yes, and here is why that matters for cognitive load. The first time you listen while chopping vegetables, you only catch the main idea.
Right.
Listen, your brain no longer has to expend massive amounts of energy deciphering the core meaning. Its cognitive load drops, which frees up bandwidth to suddenly notice those prepositions and subtle verb tense shifts naturally. The consistency of the repetition basically compensates for the multitasking.
I hear what you're saying, but is noticing a preposition on the third listen really enough to master its usage without analyzing the rule?
I would argue, yes.
See, that is where I ultimately land on the silent foundation. Listening is undoubtedly crucial for tuning the radio, as you put it, but downgrading the importance of speaking in explicit rule practice, relying on multitasking where the goal is just progress, it simply leaves adults with an illusion of competence.
And my defense remains that this text correctly identifies translation as the ultimate enemy of fluency. Consistent, daily listening rewires the brain away from that native language translation bottleneck, building an intuitive structural foundation that rote memorization can simply never achieve.
Well, we definitely agree that language learning is a marathon. Small, consistent exposures absolutely add up over time.
They do. And encountering words in their natural spoken environment is vastly superior to staring at isolated vocabulary lists. We encourage everyone to look into the material and consider how active listening might reshape their own pursuit of fluency.
Absolutely. The human brain is infinitely complex. Mastering a new language requires engaging with it from multiple angles.
Which brings us right back to our piano. Maybe the secret to playing a masterpiece isn't just about how many hours your fingers spend striking the keys. Maybe, before you ever play a single note, you actually have to learn how to hear the music.